My dad was 78 years old when they put him in handcuffs on our dock, the same dock my grandfather built before Cedar Hollow even existed. Madison Price, freshly elected president of the Cedar Hollow HOA, stood 10 feet away and told my neighbors out loud, "This lake is a community asset now." And when the cruiser door slammed, I realized something ugly. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. I'm Ethan Cole, and up until that week I was the kind of guy who believed paperwork solved most problems. I moved back home to settle my father's affairs and manage the land I'd inherited, thousands of acres and one private lake that's basically our family's heartbeat. The place wasn't flashy, but it was real. Old stone, old pines, and a shoreline my dad had walked every morning for as long as I could remember. Cedar Hollow came later, carved out of what used to be timberland on the other side of the fence. They marketed lake living, put glossy photos of my water on their brochures, and acted like the view came with their HOA dues. For a while it was just annoying. A few extra cars, a few teenagers wandering too close. Nothing I couldn't handle with a polite chat and a, "Hey, please stay on your side." Then Madison Price showed up. She was the kind of woman who wore a blazer to a Saturday afternoon and spoke like she was reading a legal memo, even when she ordered coffee. First time I met her, she didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She introduced herself like a verdict. "Mr. Cole," she said, smiling without warmth, "we need to formalize the community's access to the lake." I remember the way she held her clipboard tight like it was a weapon. My dad stood behind me on the porch, one hand on the railing trying to look steady. Madison flipped a page and went straight for the numbers. $50,000 for community impact, she said, tapping the paper, and $500 a month for maintenance. "We can call it a partnership." I actually laughed just a short sound because I thought she had to be joking. She wasn't. "That lake is on our deed," I said. "It's private property. Always has been." Madison's smile didn't change. Only her eyes did. "Deeds can be challenged," she replied, "especially when a community has relied on a resource for years." My dad cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, calm, "but tired people have been welcome here because we let them. That's called being decent." Madison tilted her head. "Decency doesn't override the homeowners association," she said like she was teaching a child the alphabet. "And if you don't cooperate, the board has options." 2 days later, those options showed up in a county vehicle. An inspector walked my shoreline with a clipboard saying there'd been an anonymous complaint about runoff and unsafe conditions. He was polite, did his job, found nothing, and left. But the message landed exactly where Madison wanted it to land, right in my father's chest. That night, he sat at the kitchen table staring at his coffee like it had betrayed him. "I don't want trouble," he said quietly. "I just want to live out my days without people yelling at me." I wanted to tell him it would be fine. I wanted to promise it. But Madison's whole vibe was, she didn't just want access to the lake. She wanted to make an example out of the Cole family. The next HOA meeting proved it. They held it in their little clubhouse, polished floors, framed rules on the wall, a big community-first banner like they were running a campaign. Madison stood at the front like a courtroom attorney clicking through slides. And then she pointed at my dad. "Frank Cole is refusing to comply," she announced. "He's withholding a community resource and creating safety risks." My dad looked around the room. People he'd waved to for years, people he'd let fish off our dock, people who'd smiled in his face. Most of them looked down at their laps. A few looked annoyed like my father was personally inconveniencing them. Madison's voice sharpened. "Some people struggle with change," she said, "but Cedar Hollow has standards." That's when my dad stood up, slow hand shaking slightly. "I'm not struggling with change," he said. "I'm struggling with disrespect." Madison didn't miss a beat. "Sit down, sir," she snapped. "You're not recognized." Not recognized. Like he was a nobody, on his own land. On the drive home, my dad didn't talk. He just stared out the window, jaw tight, like he was trying not to give her the satisfaction of seeing him crack. When we pulled into the driveway, he paused, hand on the door handle. "She wants me to feel small," he said. And I knew he was right. The next morning, Madison escalated from threats to a full-on land grab. A survey crew appeared at the edge of our property line, pounding stakes into the ground like they owned the place. I walked out there, boots in wet grass, and asked who authorized it. One of the guys shrugged and handed me a printed email. Cedar Hollow HOA letterhead. Madison's signature. a claim that they were reestablishing community boundaries due to historical usage and community necessity. I called Madison. She answered like she'd been waiting. "Oh, Ethan," she said, too casual. "Don't be dramatic. We're just correcting a misunderstanding." "You're trespassing," I said. "Pull them off my land." She sighed. Actually sighed like I was wasting her time. "If you cause a scene, I'll have security handle it," she said. "Or law enforcement. Whatever's needed." That afternoon she made good on that threat. My dad went down to the dock with a cane and a tackle box just like he always did. 2 HOA security guys followed him like he was a shoplifter. Madison was there too, standing on the path with her phone out recording. "You are not authorized to access this lake," she said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. My dad blinked at her. "I built half of this dock," he replied, voice shaking. "You're telling me I can't stand on my own boards?" Madison didn't answer him. She turned to the security guys. "Remove him," she said. One of them reached for my dad's arm. My dad jerked back, stumbled a little, and that's when Madison called the cops. By the time I got down there, my father was being cuffed, while Madison explained sweet as pie to an officer that he was trespassing and refusing lawful HOA directives. I saw my dad's face in that moment. Not fear, not anger, just something worse. Humiliation. I stepped forward. "Officer," I said, holding my hands open, "this is private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." Madison cut in immediately. "He's interfering," she said. "He's unstable." "Unstable? About my father?" The officer looked torn like he didn't want to be the bad guy, but he also didn't want a complaint filed on him. And Madison knew exactly how to play that. My dad got put in the back of the cruiser, and Madison looked at me like she'd just won a round. That night, my house felt smaller than it ever had. The kitchen lights buzzed. The paperwork on the table looked like a mountain. My dad sat on the couch staring at the wall, silent. I didn't sit down. I paced. I kept thinking, I can fight this. I can. But then I looked at my father, his shoulders slumped, his breathing shallow, and the fight suddenly had a price tag that wasn't money. For the first time, I didn't doubt the facts. I doubted my endurance. Because the truth is, being right doesn't always feel powerful when you're exhausted. I opened my laptop and typed out a draft email to Madison, something neutral, something like, "Let's discuss a compromise." My finger hovered over send, and I hated that I was even considering it. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mr. Cole," a man asked quietly. "My name is Luis Ortega. I work maintenance for Cedar Hollow. I shouldn't be calling you, but you need to know something." We met the next morning at a diner off the highway. He kept his voice low, eyes scanning the room like Madison might pop out of the sugar packet holder. "She's lying," he said. "She's been telling the board you're holding water hostage so she can push an emergency vote." Emergency vote for what I asked. Luis swallowed. "To force an easement. To pressure you into signing access rights. And she's got a developer sniffing around someone who wants a fancy dock, a bigger clubhouse. A whole lake project." So that's what it was. Not rules, not safety. A deal. Luis slid a printed packet across the table, emails, meeting notes, budget line items that didn't make sense, legal fees, consulting, a payment labeled site planning, all tied to Madison's personal email chain. My stomach tightened. I drove home and went straight to the old safe in my father's office, the one he never used for money, only papers. I knew it was there because I'd watched him open it when I was a kid like it held a secret. Inside was a thick envelope labeled in my grandfather's handwriting, "Water rights do not lose." And as I started reading, the whole chessboard shifted. It wasn't just a deed. It wasn't just property lines. It was a set of agreements from decades ago, water rights access restrictions, mapped references to an underground valve system that fed not just our lake, but parts of the surrounding area. The way it was written was blunt. The Cole family retained control over the lake and the flow regulation point period. Not negotiable, not community governed, not subject to HOA bylaws that didn't even exist back then. I called Derek Shaw, a local attorney who'd dealt with HOAs before. He came out that afternoon, read the documents, and his eyebrows lifted. "This is strong," he said. "This is very strong." "But will it stop her?" I asked. Derek glanced towards the lake. "Not by itself," he said. "People like this don't stop because you're right. They stop when you make it expensive to keep lying." So we built a plan. No drama, no threats, no games that would hurt innocent neighbors. just evidence, procedure, and a moment so clear it couldn't be spun into one of Madison's speeches. We pulled security footage from the day my father was cuffed. We gathered witness statements, Martha Lane, an older resident who'd been there and had the backbone to say, "That woman is out of control." We had Dr. Elena Reyes take independent water samples so Madison couldn't claim contamination as a reason to seize control. And Luis agreed to testify because he was done watching her bully people. Then we waited for Madison's favorite stage, another HOA meeting. She announced it like a coronation. Tonight her email read, "We reclaim the community lake." Reclaim. Like she was liberating something from a villain, while she was literally the one who had my dad in handcuffs. The clubhouse was packed. Madison stood in front of a projector dressed like she was about to argue a case in court. She talked about shared resources and modern governance and community safety. She smiled at people when they nodded, like she was handing them righteousness. And then she pointed at me. "Ethan Cole has refused reasonable requests," she said. "He has endangered the community and obstructed lawful access." I stood up slow, heart thudding hard enough I could feel it in my throat. Derek stood beside me, calm, carrying a folder. Madison's eyes narrowed. "You're not recognized," she said again, like it was her favorite word. I didn't ask permission. I walked to the front and placed the old documents on the table gently, like they were fragile. "Before you vote," I said, voice steady, "you should see what you're actually voting against." Madison tried to laugh. "Old papers don't override." Derek cut in, polite but sharp. "These are recorded instruments tied to water rights and flow control," he said. "And yes, they override your bylaws." You could feel the room shift. People stopped fidgeting. Phones came out. Madison's smile started to crack just slightly. "That's irrelevant," she said too fast. "We're discussing community access, not—" I held up a page with a map reference. "This isn't a debate," I said. "This is ownership." Madison's voice tightened. "You're threatening the community," she snapped. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting a lie." And then this was the part Derek warned me had to be precise. I nodded once. Luis, positioned at the control point, did exactly what we planned. For a brief moment, the clubhouse's lawn irrigation outside the windows stuttered and stopped. Not the neighborhood, not homes, just the HOA's showpiece system, something Madison loved pointing to as community excellence. Heads turned, people murmured. And before Madison could turn it into a speech, I nodded again. It came back on. 15 seconds, that was all. But the message hit like a freight train. Madison's face went pale, then red. "See," she barked, pointing at me. "He's sabotaging us." Derek didn't raise his voice. "No," he said. "He's demonstrating lawful control while preventing harm. Something you've refused to acknowledge." Martha Lane stood up in the second row. "You got an old man arrested," she said, loud and trembling with anger. "You should be ashamed." Another resident spoke, then another. People started talking over each other about fines Madison handed out, threats she'd made, letters she'd sent. The room became something Madison couldn't manage with a gavel. She slammed it anyway. "Order," she yelled. That's when Derek slid the packet of evidence onto the table. Emails, budget discrepancies, Luis's documentation, witness statements, the water report, and the footage. A county representative who'd been quietly observing because Derek had arranged it stepped forward and asked Madison for copies. Madison's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she didn't have a line ready. An officer at the back of the room approached. Not rushing, not dramatic, just doing his job. He spoke to the county rep, glanced at the documents, then looked directly at Madison. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to speak with you outside." Madison shook her head like she couldn't believe reality was disobeying her. "This is harassment," she hissed. This is a setup." The officer didn't argue. He simply repeated himself. Madison turned to this crowd, searching for allies. The room that used to nod at her didn't nod anymore. When she finally walked toward the door, she passed my father, who'd insisted on coming despite everything. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just looked at her like she was what she'd always been, a bully in a blazer. Madison's wrists disappeared behind her back as the officer guided her out. No grand speech, no cinematic music, just the quiet sound of consequences arriving late but real. I watched her leave, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. Because the moment you realize someone can't intimidate you anymore because the truth is documented, witnessed, and standing in the open, that's the moment their power evaporates. And if there's one lesson I learned the hard way, it's this: paperwork doesn't just prove ownership. It protects your spine when someone tries to bend it.